the picture to you. It shows a man holding an umbrella, sweating profusely, and he's having a dialogue with the sun. So he says, "Dear sun, please go to settings, display, brightness, and reduce it. Too hot to handle." And the sun, he replies, he says, "I have not changed any settings. Please go to your settings. And number one, increase number of trees. 2, reduce carbon emission levels. 3, reduce concrete jungles. 4, increase number of lakes. Basically, switch to human mode from auto mode." So I think this one little picture probably is worth all the millions of words which are written by way of INDCs by different countries. But one of the points which is made about is reducing emissions, and today we are talking about coal. If coal were a human being, he would say that, "Please don't paint me black. I'm already black. Some people call me black diamond. I may have edges. Can they be rounded off?" But what it has provided to the world so far is a lot of energy, a lot of electricity, which has propelled economic growth, which has brought about the kind of prosperity, which has also reduced inequalities, but at the same time brought about increasing disparities in the world. I recall as a student, and I must have shared this story earlier, I used to live in an adjoining town called Faridabad. In the heart of the town, there was a thermal plant. And the citizens of Faridabad used to face load shedding for about 7-8 hours per day. And sometimes they would experience that when the thermal plant would function, it would release a lot of smoke and cause a lot of noise. So when the noise was heard and the smoke was experienced, some people would get very irritated. But I can tell you that if you asked anybody whether he preferred those 6-8 hours of blackout, brownout, or the noise and the discharge, probably everybody would say that, "Let me have electricity, because I can do many more things with electricity, and maybe I can bear whatever nuisance is being caused." But I think gradually, with the passage of time and with the awareness going up and science and technology coming to our aid, environmental concerns have changed, sensitivities have changed, action which countries and economies and technologies have taken, they have changed. So all in all, I think we are moving towards a situation where it is possible to balance things out. It is possible to reap the benefits and at the same time keep the adverse impact under control, minimize it, if not eliminate it entirely. Now, coming from the Secretary Environment, it might seem that I am actually making a case for coal. But I am not making a case for coal. I am making a case for meeting the electricity demand of the people of this country. In order to understand how the electricity sector has developed in India, let's go back in time and look at the historical perspective. It is very interesting for those who don't know these statistics. The history of coal in India the modern way in which coal is being utilized and exploited is more than 350 years old. In 1744, they started mining coal in India. The history of electricity is less than 150 years. The first electricity generation unit was set up in 1898. It was powered by water in the hills of Darjeeling. From 1898 to 1947, almost 50 years, when India became free, the installed capacity of electricity in India was 1362 megawatts. Thermal had a share of a little over 50%, 800 and something, which included gas, by the way. But in 1947, India used to produce 30 million tons of coal. In fact, we used to produce 6 million tons of coal even without producing any electricity, even before electricity came. After independence, when the electricity policy was declared, the government made a commitment that we will do at least 40% of electricity from hydro source. And indeed, if you look at the way electricity sector developed till 1992, the share of hydro was very healthy. Plan by plan, if you look at the statistics, in 1992, which is the beginning of, I think, the 8th plan, thermal power capacity was about 42 or 43,000 megawatts. The total capacity that time was somewhere around 63 megawatts. And all the big hydro projects that came to India, they came in the first flush when Bhakra Nangal and Hirakud and Beas and so many other big Pando, all these dams of bid, Damodar Valley and other projects. But somewhere in the late 80s and 90s, you see a tremendous slowing down of hydro capacity. Because of a variety of reasons, we need not go into them, but largely they were driven by environmental concerns and issues of rehabilitation. So when in 1992, India became a liberal economy, one of the first sectors to get off the blocks was electricity generation. From 1992 to 2016, we've seen the total installed capacity move up from 63,000 to now almost 2,78,000 or 2,80,000. And thermal, coal particularly, has assumed a much larger share in this. And this is all a story of the last 15 years. But even as coal has assumed such overwhelming share, which incidentally is not peculiar to the Indian power sector, this has happened all over the world. The per capita energy consumption, per capita electricity consumption continues to be almost 33% of the world's average. We are not even talking of its comparison with OECD, because the comparison is absurd. You will be 10-15% of the average consumption in developed countries. But here is an economy which is growing at 7% plus, likely to grow at a higher rate. Here is a country where more than 300 million people don't have access to electricity. And here is a country where there is large disparity, regional disparity in the availability of electricity. So if the requirement of the country for electricity has to be met, then what are the options that a country needs to exercise? obviously, nations across the world and across history have exercised choices according to their current circumstances, according to the availability of technology, according to the resources which are available to them, and obviously guided by the priorities that they have. But the overwhelming priority is to meet the needs of a growing economy and meet the fundamental needs of its citizens. So in exercising that choice, if India is one of the largest reservoirs of coal, it will draw upon that reservoir. Is it bad in itself? Or is it required that while you draw upon this reservoir and use this resource, you do it in a way, using the best technology available, that you minimize the adverse consequences which we have witnessed historically happening in other parts of the world when they use the technologies which were available at that point in time. In fact, if you look at the global picture and if you look at the planet as one entity, then it should be possible that people who have the wind resource, they should depend on wind, and people who have solar should depend on solar, and others who have some other source can depend on the other source. If I don't have renewable energy, if I'm not blessed with solar energy, I cannot be compelled to use solar energy. I can't. If I don't have wind, unless there are better technologies which can harness low wind speeds and convert it into energy, I cannot be compelled to exercise that option. But given all these limitations, the way the Indian electricity sector and the energy scenario and India's concerns for changing climate have been addressed is what Dr. Chandrabhushan mentioned, which we have already declared in our INDCs. And government has moved very fast. In fact, recently 3 or 4 initiatives, one of them was mentioned about tightening up the norms, emission norms, the water consumption norms for the thermal power sector. We have also come up with a new fly ash utilization policy where we want that almost 100% of fly ash should be utilized. Unfortunately, the quality of our coal is not the best. It has a lot of ash content, and it gets transported and it gets, as a byproduct, it gets accumulated. So how is it that you can best utilize fly ash? Gradually, with the passage of time, we've reached a utilization level of 60%, and now better ways, more efficient ways of utilizing fly ash are being found. But alongside this, the other major announcement on which work has already started is the setting up of washeries along the coal fields. The Ministry of Coal has already commenced work, and they are committed to complete about 16 washeries. I'm sure the Power and Coal Minister, when he comes, he'll explain this at greater length. But that is yet another action which the government is taking. And there are other environment-friendly measures about how coal is extracted and beneficiation. Of course, people talk about carbon capture and storage, but this is a technology which needs to be established first and commercially found viable before we can look at it. But the shift to the best available technologies in terms of power generation has already taken place. In the current plan, more than 50% of the new capacity, thermal capacity, is coming out of supercritical. In the 13th plan, government has already declared that we will not resort to any subcritical technology. So, by and large, the quest for better technology that is available, I think that is being pursued. Better ways of managing your resources, that is being pursued. But you do have dilemmas. One of the dilemmas, for example, and you will find conflicting reports. One group of experts will say that it's better to locate thermal plants near the coal source. And suddenly another group will come up and say that, oh, you've caused so much of concentration of power plants in one particular area, and now the comprehensive environment pollution index of that area has gone haywire. So stop doing it there, take it away from there. So I think these are policy dilemmas which governments have to resolve and find optimum way. I was going through a report which has been published by World Coal Association. I can't vouch for the authenticity of the statistics even in this, but I was considering that we are talking to a very learned community of experts and practitioners. I would like to leave this one thought. It says that analysis of the impact various policies or events have had on global CO2 emissions demonstrates the potential significance of supporting efficiency improvements in the global coal fleet. If a global initiative was in place to increase the average efficiency of the global coal fleet to the level of off-the-shelf technology, its 2 gigatons of savings would place it 4th on the list of 20 activities. They have a table on which activity has led to how much reduction in CO2 emissions. And this is where they say that utilization of supercritical and ultra supercritical technology actually has a greater chance of succeeding, and it's a more efficient and economical way of reducing emissions. It would be more than 3 times as effective in reducing CO2 emissions than the global deployment of all non-hydro renewable energies combined. And I think in this report or in some other report, they have said that analysis shows the cost of replacing subcritical with supercritical and ultra supercritical technology saves CO2 at a cost of around $10 per ton in 2035 in comparison to abating a ton of CO2 through deployment of large-scale solar PV in India that can cost up to $40 per ton. So the point which I would like to leave behind is that, you see, rather than dubbing coal as a villain, and in the good old days, by the way, those of you who are familiar with Indian movies, in Indian movies, there is always a villain. I'll just finish. So what I was saying is that if you look at Indian movies, in Indian movies there is always a villain. And in the good old days, the villain at the end of the movie reformed himself. He became a good human being. In modern times, invariably the villain is killed. He doesn't survive. So I think we should give coal a chance. It can survive. We can reform it. It can meet the electricity requirements of countries, and it can certainly contribute to the well-being of the world. Thank you very much.